And Jonathan and Diane had actually asked me to talk to you a little bit about the Swift programming language, which you might be familiar. Apple's just introduced it at the WWDC in June, which I attended, and it is just no hyperbole. It's revolutionary. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about that. Now people recognize what that is. I'm really impressed that you know what that thing is at the top there, with those holes in it. It talks about two things. That was called Chubb Institute, and they were behind the times, but I think they did it on purpose because they wanted their students to learn the hard way and to be absolutely unforgiving, because when you punch those cards, you get a deck about this high, and if you have one mistake, you have to find out where that is, pull that card out, and put in the fixed one. And if you slip on a banana peel and you drop them, oh my God, you have to get them all back in the exact right order. It was a mess, but it certainly made you disciplined. There's no forgiveness at all if you made a mistake like that. 30 years later, we have Swift today from Apple. And it's also important to note the IBM COBOL, that's where we get punch cards, and Apple Swift is what we have today. Okay. Now, in 30 years, believe it or not, there's actually, if you remember back then, they were the worst, fiercest enemies. Now there's a partnership between Apple and IBM. IBM is building apps for the enterprise using Swift, the programming language. And yes, IBM and Apple have worked together before in the past, but it's far more significant now because both of them are in the top 20 of the Fortune 500, and this partnership will be very, very significant. And for a programmer, developer like myself or anyone else, the time I invest in Swift is a good idea because I can get a job with IBM. Every programmer. And not to mention the App Store. Yeah, that's a nice thing too. And you'll see, if you remember the 1984 commercial, Apple commercial, that's a Lego version of it in the top left. Come down and the great people. And of course, the famous letter that Apple actually welcomed IBM to the world of personal computing. And so you can't say that Apple is mean-spirited. They were nice then, boy, did it cost them. And they're nice now. There you see on the bottom right, Tim Cook meeting with Ginny, the CEO of IBM. And on the bottom left there, you have Steve Jobs pointing to the IBM headquarters building in New York. And now they just put Tim Cook's face on the right side. Now they're not enemies anymore. Okay. Now about Swift. It's a breakthrough new programming language for iPhones, iPads, and for Macs. And they released both at the same time because they want you to really benefit from what you learn and not have to worry about, staying with one platform. The old language was called Objective-C. Objective-C was around since the middle 1980s. And, Swift, there's one guy at Apple who developed it. He spent about 3 years, which is actually about the amount of time that was spent developing the language C by Bell Labs, AT&T. I don't know if you're familiar with that language. But this language C is really the basis of practically all languages that exist today, except for Swift. Swift is something that Apple has complete control over, so they don't have standards per se that they have to follow. So they can make, just like making their own phone or computer or anything else they do, they have free control to make it as good as they want to. Let's see. Okay, what it means for you is your apps are faster, they're more reliable, and developers can be more productive. And it's backed by Apple and IBM, which means that there's going to be a huge future to this language. You're not wasting your time learning it. And you can expect a lot. Let's see. I just thought it may not make much sense to you, but a few code samples. There, the old language, Objective-C, is at the top there. You can see there's lots of square brackets and parentheses. And on the bottom, Swift, no parentheses and no square brackets. And much more concise. And here you see more square brackets and self dot in front and semicolon at the end. None of that in the Swift version. And what's significant there is that in every line of code in a normal programming language like Java or C, you have to put a semicolon at the end of the line. Or if it's an if statement, then you have to put parentheses like you saw on the last one. You don't have to do that anymore in Swift. And that affects every single line of code that you write. So you shouldn't listen to your programmers telling you it's such a hard thing. What a big, wide, long learning curve. That's just whining. Okay. Oh, and the best thing of all is emoji. You see the little character on the Swift at the bottom, the little calendar? Yeah, that actually represents a variable in your code. And before long, he's looking at source code, it'll be fun, little funny pictures all over the place. Because they have to develop emoji that represents things that programmers deal with, not smiley faces. You know, what does that mean, a smiley face in your code? It doesn't mean much. Okay. And this chart here, this is from a place called Github. Github is the most popular repository, a place where people upload their open source projects. On the left there, you can't read it, but those are all the programming languages that are represented by GitHub. And it's showing, this chart shows, is by quarter, it's updated quarterly. And Swift, this is the first time Swift is appearing because it was introduced in June, so it barely had any time. But it's already, it's not at the bottom, it's already way ahead of a lot of other languages that have existed for much longer, with bizarre names like Groovy and Puppet and Coffee Script. And you can see it's trending because new watchers per repository. A lot of people are watching these Swift projects. And these projects help me, and probably your guys, Todd, that I can go out there and see samples of Swift code. If I don't know how to do something, I can look it up there and say, oh, I've already done it. They've uploaded it. I have a perfect example of how to do something. Okay, now we'll get into